Friends, today we'll be learning the most flexible and the most powerful array method, the reduce method. Very few JavaScript engineers understand the array reduce method properly. Okay, so it's worth paying attention because it will make you the exceptional engineer. Okay, and a lot of interview questions are asked around reduce method. So it's worth your attention. Okay, so let's try to simplify and completely understand the arrays reduce method. So let's see a very real world example. So just imagine, okay, just keep imagining with me. You have a glass, an empty glass, okay? That may look something like this. Okay, so initially, to begin with, you have an empty glass. Okay, at the same time, you have three ingredients. You have some water, lemon, and oranges. Okay, so initially, what you have? Empty glass and a couple of items like water, lemon, orange. Simple? Are you with me so far? Nice. And the end result that we are looking for is a glass of fresh water plus lemon plus orange juice. So this is our end result. It's a glass with water, orange and lemon juice. Okay, so just make sure that you understood the problem statement, you understood the the requirements. Okay, so we have empty glass, a couple of ingredients, and we know that we need a certain end result. Okay, so in order to accomplish this task, there are many ways. One of the ways could be, initially you have an empty glass, you put in some water, and now you have a glass full of water. Pay attention to every step, friends. Now, you have in the first step, in the first iteration, you have a glass of water. We start our second step with the glass of water, with the end result of the first step. We add some lemon to it. Now we have a glass of lemon water. Is it making sense to you? Common sense, right? Now, for the second step, the end result is a glass of lemon water. Then, in the third step, the end result of the second step becomes our first step. So we have a glass of lemon water. We add some oranges to it. And now we have the result. We have a glass of lemon plus orange water. This is exactly how JavaScript's Array.reduce method works. Look at it carefully, friends, for a moment and try to make sense of it. I have added a bit of text here, and as soon as we will do a couple of Array.reduce examples, these will make so much more sense to you. So this is the initial state, maybe. In every iteration, we get access to one item, and every step's end result becomes the next step's initial item, previous item. Don't worry if it's not making any sense to you. It's perfectly fine. We'll be looking at very good animations. We'll be looking at real world examples, and then we'll again move back to animations. So it will be very, very clear to you. Okay? Let's move ahead, friends. Again, this particular example can be demonstrated using animations, but that was a very time-consuming task, so I have skipped that for now. So let's see the syntax of arrays reduce method. So for arrays reduce method, it takes in a function, which of course is a callback function, and an initial value. So it takes in two arguments. First is a function, and the second one is the initial value. Okay. This function is called for each item of the array. So if there are 5 items in the array, this function is invoked 5 times. Okay. And in every iteration, every time it is invoked, it gets access to a previous value and the current value. Don't worry if it's not making 100% sense to you. It will make. We will revisit it. Okay. So Array.reduce method takes in a callback function and an initial value. The function is invoked. The function is called for each item. And in each iteration, in each function call, it gets access to the previous value and the current value. Now, what is this previous value and what is the current value? So, we provide the initial value. In the very first iteration, that initial value becomes the current value, the previous value. Okay? In the first iteration, the initial value becomes the previous value, and the first item of the array, the very first item of the array becomes our current item. Okay? All right. So, if we look at this example, in the first iteration, the initial value was the previous value, and the current item, the first item became the current item, and it returned a glass of water. In the second iteration, the glass of water became the previous value, which was returned from the first iteration. The second item in the array, the lemon, became the current item, and we returned a glass of water plus lemon, a glass of lemon juice. What we returned from the second iteration became the previous value of the third iteration, third step. We added lemon to it. The third item in the array became our current item. And the end result that we returned was a glass of water plus lemon plus orange juice. Okay? We will see very, very real world examples of these. So again, let's look at the syntax. The reduce method takes in a function and an initial value. Okay. The function is called or invoked for each item in the array. Okay. Each invocation is called an iteration. Okay. In every iteration, the function has access to the previous value and the current value. What is the previous value? For the first iteration, it's the initial value. For the next set of iterations, it's the value that we returned from the previous iteration. And current value is very simple. It's each item. Okay. Now that we have a rough idea of what Array.reduce method is, let's go to some real example. Okay. So I am assuming that you are aware a bit of the back end, the front end. You have the bigger picture already. Okay. So I'll not spend time on that right now. So it can happen that you make a request from your front end to the back end that I need a list of all developers in our system. Okay. And backend will probably give you something like this. It's an array of objects, and each object contains data about one of the developers. Okay. So you can see that it's a big array and it has 3 items, and each item contains some information about a developer. The developers are either from the front-end department or the backend department. Okay. But in the front end, maybe you have two checkboxes. And in the one checkboxes, you need to show all the front end developers. In the second, you need to show all the back end developers. And you just need the first name. Okay. So you need data. Your component needs data in this format. Backend developers, list of their first names. Front-end developers, list of their last names. Again, friends, I'm assuming that you are clear with JavaScript object. You are clear with JavaScript arrays. Okay. If I go there right now, it will be an hour or 2 hours long video. Okay. So I'm assuming that you are very clear with object of arrays and arrays of objects. Okay. So let's move with that assumption. Again, I'll repeat the problem. We have data in a different format. We need that in a different format. Initially, from the backend, we got an array of objects, but in the front end, we need an object of arrays. So completely transforming the data, right? Now, how to do that? And the best solution for these kind of problems is the arrays.reduce method. Let's see it. So I'll open this code sandbox, okay, and fork it. Again, it's the exact same problem. Okay, so we have an array called developers array, and that's an array of different objects. Each object represents a developer. Okay, and the end result that we are looking for is something like this. Okay, before solving this problem, let's look in an animated way how we will solve this problem. Then we will solve this problem together, and then finally we will look at the animation again so that it's 100% clear to us. Okay, so just a quick recap. The format, the syntax of reduce function is that it takes in a callback function and an initial value. This function is called for each and every item of the array. In every iteration, in every invocation, it has access to the previous value and the current value. Let's move to the animation, get the proper mental model, how this works under the hood, and then we'll move to writing the code. Let's start, friends. So I have created this simple animation so that you are absolutely clear what's happening. So we have this array, okay, and we are going to use the reduce function. So the reduce function takes in an initial value, okay, and in our case we need an object with two properties, backend and frontend, and both are arrays. So we have kept this as our initial value. Okay, initial value is usually of the same shape or the same structure as our end result. Okay, as we practice, the intuition will start to develop. Then the reduce function gets previous value and the current value in every iteration. So for the first iteration, for the first item, what will be the previous value? I have explained it a couple of times till now, so I expect you to answer it. Yeah, never mind. If you did not get it, it's going to be the initial value. In the first iteration, the previous value will be equal to the initial value. Okay, so you can see that this accumulated or initial value or previous value is an object with properties backend and frontend, and they are empty right now. So in the very first iteration, it gets the first item of the array. And then we can write some logic inside the function that, if the department is frontend, return this object but push this John inside the front end. Okay, So this is the logic that we will be writing inside the function. So what will happen? It will return this object, but before returning this, it will push John to the front end after checking that the department is front end. So it returns this object, and this object naturally becomes the previous value for the next iteration. Okay. So again, this function will be invoked with the second item. And what would be its previous item? Previous item would be the item that was returned, the value that was returned from the previous iteration, which is this one, right? And what is going to be the current item for the second iteration is going to be this object. So it gets this object. So this is the current item. This is the previous item. Again, we write some logic. We check the department is backend. So to this object, we will return it, but before returning it, we will push Jane to the backend array, to this particular place. Okay. And now when it's returned, when the object is returned, this is the accumulated value or the previous value. Okay. So in the second iteration, it got this object with backend empty and frontend John, but it returned an object with frontend John and backend Jane. And now this becomes the previous value for the third iteration. So it moves to the third iteration. If it sounds confusing to you, it's natural. It's lots of things going on, right? I try to make it as simple as possible. If required, watch it again. It's worth it. Okay. You can literally do anything with reduce. You can replace map with reduce. You can do what you do with filter with reduce. You can literally, it's the most powerful method. And with power comes a bit of complexity. Okay. So doesn't matter if you're not getting it 100%, watch it again, you will get it. Okay. In the third iteration, friends, try to tell me what is the current value. Yeah, this is the current value, James Bond. Okay, this object. What is the previous value? It's the value that was returned from the second iteration, which is this object. Okay, now here again, we get the current item. We have the previous item. We check, we write some logic, and we check that the department is backend. And we insert the James string to backend property. And finally, we return it. So this finally, what we return from the last item of the array, it becomes our result. I know it was a lot of concept, and I tried to simplify it as much as possible. So now let's see reduce in action. And before moving to code, let me summarize whatever I did so far. So reduce function is the most general purpose of all array functions. Okay, it can return anything. It takes in an argument function and an initial value. The argument function or the callback function gets each item of the array one by one. Argument function or the callback function has access to accumulated value or the previous value and the current item in every iteration. Okay. Now let's move to the example. Okay. So we have this array, developers array, an array of objects, and this is the end result that we are looking for. Okay. So right now the reduced array is an empty array, but we will now use the array method reduce to reach here. Okay. So first of all, let's start writing the code together. So developers array. Okay. developers array.reduce, what is going to be the first argument? The first argument is going to be a function. Okay. And what is going to be the second argument? The second argument is going to be an initial value. Okay. So in this case, we need something in this format. Okay. We need an object. That object must have two properties. One is backend and one is frontend. Okay. And they are both arrays. Okay. And the function is called for each item. Okay. And it has access to the previous value and the current value. Or we can call it accumulated value or item, whatever you are comfortable with. Okay. Let's call it item and accumulated value, just to make sure that these words, whatever we name these, doesn't matter. Okay. The first argument is always the previous value or the accumulated value, and the second one is the current item. Okay. Now, in the first iteration, we will be getting this particular object, okay, as previous item, and the current item would be this first item. Okay. So in basically every iteration will be getting one item. So let's check if the items, so we are checking if item dot department is equal to backend. Okay, then we want to do something. So then then we have access to this previous item. Okay, so this previous item is this object. So prev dot, we have a key called backend here. Okay, backend, and that to that backend array we want to push item dot first. What did we do here? We will look into it again. Okay, and if it's not backend, what I want to do is to the front end property, I'll push item dot first. Finally, we will return the previous. Let me save it and let me show you what I've done so far. So here, the reduce array, this is the initial state. This particular function will be called for each item, as you saw in the animation. We may see it again, and it gets access to the previous item and the current item. Okay. What we are checking here for the current item is if the item's department is front end, push the item dot first, that is the first name, to the front end array. If it's back end, then push the first name to the back end array. And we returned the object, and what we return becomes the previous item of that iteration. I hope you are getting it. Okay. In case of any queries, any questions, I'll be very happy to explain it to you 100 times. Okay. So feel free to ask me as much question as you need, but I want you to get it. Okay. Don't feel bad about asking questions. Don't think about everyone else. Just ask. Okay. Until you get it 100%. Okay. Nice. And now if we see the answer, now if we see the solution, we have the exact format that we needed. We have an object with key front end and back end. Front end is an array which contains John. Back end is the array which contains James. If we go through the animation again, which I went through, this entire thing will make much more sense to you. So a couple of things I want you to do is that try to write this without much help. Okay, try to understand the concept, the mental model first. Okay, then try to write it. Second thing that you can try is write a reduce function. Okay, that iterates through all three items and gives back the total commits that John, Jane, and James have, committed. Okay, so again you will reduce. The initial value will be a number which will be 0, and on every iteration keep adding commits to it. So that array.reduce should return total, a number which is total of all the commits. So this is a homework for you, right? We can definitely practice it together if you feel like. So it's up to you. So I can do a quick poll, and that do you want to do it yourself at home, or do you want me to do it together with you? Okay, so I'll leave it to you. Friends, I know, this may be confusing for some of you. Don't feel bad, because it is confusing. It took me several hours to make sense of how reduce works, right? And we have spent just 30 minutes on it, less than 30 minutes on it. So if required, take your time. Practice the two problems that I've told you. In the document, if you go down, I have added a couple of, very good questions of reduce, very real world use of reduce, array reduce. Please practice it. And yeah, feel free to ask me any questions. Okay? It's worth it. The amount of time you spend on mastering the reduce function, it's totally worth.